So Kālī, Durgā, Lakṣmī, connecting with the Hindu goddess without appropriation. So my name is Freedom Cole, and we're using these three particular goddesses. People say, well, where's Saraswati in there? And one of the things is I'm a practitioner of something called Daivya Chikitsa. And Daivya Chikitsa means how do we use these gods and goddesses to heal our life, to heal the problems that are going on with us. You know, if our relationships aren't working, if finances aren't working, if life is not working, which god or goddess do we connect to? And in the ancient world, it was very specific for which god or goddess that we connect to. And when you go online or you look at these god-goddess cards, they give you these really simple words, and they're extremely overgeneralized. Like for Ganesh, they'll just say overcoming obstacles. And they don't give you anything else. Like, well, why? What else? He's good for schizophrenia. He's good for mathematics. He's good. So there's this whole realm. If you were having trouble in school with mathematics, we could utilize Ganesha to help you, because why is it that somebody gets mathematics and somebody else, it just, their brain is just not able to grasp that realm of thought process. And so Ganesh helps us enter that realm so that our brain functions differently. And I'm using Ganesh because he works with Ganesh. So, all right. So Daivya Chikitsa is determining what gods and goddesses an individual is best to be working with to deal with what's happening in their life. And when somebody who does Daivya Chikitsa like I do is successful, that next math test, the score went up 10 points already. There's tangible results if you give the right remedy. And if if change isn't happening, then there was something wrong with the remedy and we readjust. So it's a very intricate science. And when we get to the end, I'm going to talk about why we use Durga, why we use Kālī, why we use Lakṣmī. And they're three of the most used goddesses because of what they heal and what our culture deals with. But before we get to how I use them and why I use them and why they're good for you, the first focus is without appropriation. How do we use them without appropriation? And so first we have to understand what is appropriation and some different views on appropriation. So the most common definition of appropriation is adoption of elements from a minority culture by the dominant culture. So there's a power structure associated with the appropriation. So somebody who is oppressed, subordinated socially, politically, economically, in some way, the powers at hand who can do whatever they want take from that culture or individual and utilize their stuff without their permission, without the way that they intended to use it, and in various other alterations. But the primary definition is a oppressed culture had something and the dominant culture took it. So this is our standard definition of cultural appropriation. Now, what we run into in modern times is often a situation of somebody being angry about cultural appropriation and telling somebody to stop. Now, sometimes stop is the thing that should be done. Other times, the person who's using this thing that isn't theirs, they actually need education. And with proper education, it's no longer an appropriation. At least this is my approach and what I'm going to teach now. So my goal is, what do we need to know and understand so that we are properly using these Hindu gods and goddesses and not appropriating these gods and goddesses. And I asked everybody before we began, do you have any connection with any Hindu gods or goddesses? Multiple? Okay. Sounds great. Just so I have an understanding of who I'm talking to. And now, generally to be considered appropriation, there is, and as I said, there's different opinions of what is cultural appropriation before we even start talking about what it is. Not everybody agrees what it is, and different people have different perspectives. And so literally you're getting my perspective right now. And why I have a reason to give you a perspective, I'll explain in a little bit. So one method to judge appropriation is through the concept of harm. Is how is that dominant culture harming the oppressed culture by taking this thing from them? And within that, there's promoting harmful stereotypes. And when we have baseball teams named after with a Native American mascot, this is like, what is the stereotype that's being promoted when these other teams have animals and these kind of things? And so how's a Native American fit in there with that? So promoting harmful stereotypes. Then we have dilution and erasure of that culture's actual practices, which is something with yoga right now. America has taken yoga, redefined what yoga is, and is actually even selling it back to India itself. And so there's beginning to be where when somebody says yoga, they think about American yoga. They're not thinking about what Indians mean, what South Asian Indians mean about yoga. And so this is an element of erasing the original culture's utilization of that practice. Then epistemic injustice. And epistemic injustice means ways of knowing, what you know. An example of this is Tantra in India means ritual. And people started doing ritual sex and calling it Tantra, which you could call it, when we say tantric sex, it does mean ritual sex. But then people start saying Tantra and meaning only ritual sex when, going to temple, being a complete celibate your whole life, going to temple every day and saying certain prayers is also tantric. So that differentiation, epistemic injustice, intellectual property theft, is it yours to take? And then taking economic opportunities of the source culture. So, for example, when moccasins, if Native American moccasins, if a non-Native American starts outsourcing them to China and selling them in the U.S. as Native American moccasins, and with the same look, they're taking a financial gain away from the source culture. So these are all types of very clear cultural appropriation, and generally when you're claiming cultural appropriation, one of these you should be able to call into and say, this is what's happening, and this is why it's cultural appropriation. There is one form of cultural appropriation called claim deference, and claim deference means because I said so. If a person from the oppressed culture says this is cultural appropriation, then the dominant culture should listen. And this is the one that we get into the most issues with. And the argument for it is this is an oppressed person. How are they going to do everything to prove that that's actually cultural appropriation? The other side to that is, does that person have authority to talk for that tradition? If one person in a tribe says that, does the rest of the tribe agree? And is that person a valid person to make that claim? When we get to the Indian traditions, and when I say Indian, I mean Indian. And when I talk about Native Americans, I'm not using the word Indian, just for clarification. So when we get to the Indian traditions, the big difference between Native American culture and Indian culture, and I'll say Hindu culture, just a different Hindu-Indian culture, is that in Native American culture, most, not all, but most or many of the Native American communities are community-oriented and community-run. And the community has multiple people in it that are making the decisions and councils that are making decisions. So it's not one person's decision. In the Hindu Indian tradition, it doesn't work like that. There's not a community board. There's something called a lineage. There's a hierarchical system. If for worshiping Shiva, there's Shaivism, and there's somebody at the top of the chain who, if that person says so, that's what it is. It doesn't matter what anybody lower down the chain says. If somebody lower down the chain says something different, they can go off and try and start their own tradition if they want that has that variation. But there's a hierarchical structure, and there's an authoritative voice. And so this is very different. So claim deference does not work in Hindu Indian culture. So claim deference, and it's one that you'll see and hear, and it's one that I believe doesn't work in Hinduism. Counter arguments. So cultural appropriation in this environment is something taken for granted. In other environments, it's something that people say is it's silly. It's made up. It's a brand new concept, and one of the arguments is that historically there's always been cultural exchanges and there's benefits. If we look at the archaeological record, we can see when metallurgy came into Britain. We can see the movement of technology and sharing of science and the sharing of culture. So one argument against it is that it's always happened. Now, the counter-argument to that counter-argument is that just because it's always happened doesn't mean it's right. And if a dominant group is oppressing someone else, we don't say that, well, people are always being oppressed and just accept oppression. So the multi-facets of that argument. The other counter-argument is diversity, appreciation, imagination. All these things are supported by sharing cultural understandings and beliefs. And the counter-argument to that is intellectual property rights. Is this yours to take? Yes, it's great that if you paint a picture of Kālī and she's, you're doing stuff that is not appropriate with her in that picture in Hinduism, you're crossing a line, and what's the container you're within? You just took something from someone else and distorted it. And that's not just, so there's a lot of sticky, what about, if then, so so there's a lot of gray areas. There's some areas that are very clear that we got with our first few definitions. And then as we dig in, there's a lot of gray areas. So my goal is to next present to you my belief in how to make that not a gray area. How do we get some clarity of is this cultural appropriation or is it not? And that is within the realm of Hindu Indian practices, not Native American practices. I have no authority to talk about Native American practices or African American practices or anything else. So I'm talking just in this particular area and making that clear. And my belief is there's almost a cultural appropriation of one culture, of what's one cultural appropriation that's getting put onto these other cultures. And not every culture is oppressed in the same way. If we, you can't compare Native American culture where they didn't go to anywhere. They had people come in and it was genocide, and they are still oppressed, and they are still being persecuted, and they still don't have their rights. We cannot compare that to the Indian community in America, the Hindu Indian community in America, who are some of the wealthiest immigrants in America, who by percentage are more highly educated than the general American, hold more executive positions than the general European Americans. that on and on and on. You know, we can't use the same rules for those two groups. And now India was oppressed by the British for 300 years, and it was only in 1947 that stopped. So it is still fresh, it is not over, but we in America, and how Hindu Americans are in America, we cannot use the same rules. So a little difference there. And so there needs to be detail. And when we talk about the dominant culture and the oppressed culture, we can sometimes run into issues. And one of my biggest issues with that is European Americans aren't going to be the dominant culture for that many more decades. And when that changes, if we build everything around white culture versus colored culture, in 40 years from now, that's going to be in the trash, and we haven't got the core principles in place to prevent the next dominant culture from doing the same thing. So, with that said, with that context, how, with Hindu gods and goddesses, do we avoid cultural appropriation? And just a quick note. So the person before me canceled, so I'm giving the lecture twice. So I officially start at 3:30.
Well, we're going to catch one of the Shivas, so we'll come.
Yeah, that way I know you want to be for the, yeah. So,
Super stoked to see you.
yes. All right. So avoiding appropriation. So since cultural appropriation is such a gray word, I'm going to avoid it completely, and instead give us 4 other key words in avoiding cultural appropriation in Hinduism. The first is avoiding exploitation. And exploitation is defined as treating someone or a culture unfairly in order to benefit from their work or heritage. So this is printing Shiva, Kālī t-shirts if you have no association with that culture and selling it. You're exploiting this image that isn't yours to be exploiting. Now, if somebody from that culture was doing it, there's no issue. But are you trying to make money off of that culture's belongings? So, exploitation. The next, respect. And as I've listened to some of the other discussions during just this conference itself, the word respect comes up again and again. So are we using this element that we've taken from Hindu culture in a respectful way? This Ganesh that you have, like, is he in the bathroom on the toilet, bowl, or is he on your altar held in a space where he's in this respected space? So respect. And are we respecting it? One of the recent big issues that came up was somebody made a bath mat, so when you get out of the bathtub, and they put Ganesh's face on it. And in Hinduism, the feet you don't put the feet, you don't even face your feet towards the deity. Like, if the deity was there, I wouldn't put my foot up like this. So to put the deity on a face mat is considered extremely disrespectful. To put the deity anywhere below the belly button is considered disrespectful. So the deity on pants, even in India, they recommend, you're not supposed to get a tattoo of the deity. Some people get the tattoos of the deities on their legs. It's fine to get the deity tattooed above the navel. It's not appropriate to get it tattooed below the navel. So are we respecting the deity? And how do we know if we're respecting it or not? And how do we know if we're respecting it or not has to do with, do we have knowledge of that culture? And the key word that I'm going to use is intimacy. And I don't have the author's name who wrote a 40-something page article on intimacy as cultural appropriation as a form of a break of intimacy with the source culture. And I'm going to go into that very deep because I believe that's really one of the keys. Before, though, I jump into intimacy, as far as respect goes, there's, in every culture, there's fundamentalism and extremism. There's always, whether it's Hinduism, Islam, Christianity. There are the fundamentalists and the extremists always. And the fundamentalism is the concept of somebody holding an unwavering belief. Like there's no flexibility with it whatsoever. This is fundamentalism. They're not getting that this is, if the Buddha said, if point it to the moon, they're stuck on the Buddha's finger, not getting, he means look up, look towards the light, or they're getting limited and stuck. And in Hinduism, this is considered a disease. It's actually considered a disorder of the mind to become fundamentalist. Where in some other religions, it's considered spiritual to be fundamentalist. In Hinduism, it's the opposite. Fundamentalism is literally considered a mental disorder. Then extremism, and extremism is an interesting one because it means somebody who's gone to the extreme from what's norm. And the big thing about extremism is the norm good anyway? If they're burning witches, and so you decide to jail them instead, female herbalists, if you decide to jail them, and you're like, yes, you're not being extreme, but because you're being to the normatives, but it doesn't mean it's good at its source anyway. So extremism is a difficult one. But fundamentalism means we need to be flexible because we're humans. And every single human is different, thereby needs different things, and has their own way to approach the divine. So that is a core element in Hinduism. All right, so intimacy. What does it mean to have intimacy? And I'm presenting three things in Hinduism that I consider what give you intimacy. And the first is community. So you have this Ganesha. Do you have any connection to community that's also working with Ganesha, where he's being worshipped in a spiritual way? You went to Nepal and connected in with some priests and temples there. So there was this connection to that community. Then we have lineage. Some people will be worshiping Kālī or Shiva or Lakṣmī because their guru told them to, or because they're studying a particular practice where that's the form of the deity that they use. So there's this lineage where they're doing it because that's the line that they've been following. And then the third is having a priest or somebody who's authentically related to that deity teach you how to relate to that deity. So intimacy. So these are the three things, and as we go through the three goddesses, we're going to be talking about each of them relative to these points. So now this next one is also an important element because I said a priest or an authentic teacher who has a lineage. So what is somebody who has an authentic lineage? Who can be authentically tell us how to connect to these gods and goddesses where we can say, no, I'm not appropriating, I'm coming from an authentic source. And in Sanskrit, the word for this is called adhikara. And adhikara means I have authority. What authority do you have? A policeman has the authority to arrest you. A taxi driver has the authority to pick you up and take you someplace. Whatever the requirements of that particular area are fulfilled, and adhikara in different countries and different places changes. But different roles have different authority. And so this is called adhikara. So when we enter the spiritual realm, what is it that gives adhikara? And adhikara in the Indian tradition is given by someone who has adhikara. So somebody who has authority gives authority to someone else. And that's why in India there's this more hierarchical structure. And often people will ask, well, what's your lineage? According to who? What's the source? This is something that we ask in yoga and Hinduism because we want to know, does this tradition, does this line, does this teacher have adhikara? Do they have permission? Do they have authority to be teaching and sharing this information? And so why am I talking about this? Who am I to be able to talk about this? So I have adhikara to be able to give people deities and the mantras and practices that go with them. I have that authority to tell somebody to worship a particular deity. So, as I have that authority, I am sharing with you in the realm that I have authority what makes it proper and what makes it not proper. Now, adhikara, and because, as I said before, in Hinduism, there's a hierarchy. There's a person in charge, and that person in charge makes the rules. If you don't like the rules, then you're in the wrong tradition. Find another teacher. Not so easy, but you either go with the rules or you find a different teacher that has the rules that fit for you. Or you stay in the tradition, wait till you get to the top, and then when it's your turn to have authority, you can alter things as needed. In my tradition, in my lineage, which is called Parampada, meaning Parampada means that from teacher to teacher to teacher to teacher. So in my lineage, they're very clear that adhikara does not connect to skin color, which is called varna. It does not connect to your birth, janma. And these are not what qualify you. What qualifies you is the quality of who you are. And particularly in my tradition, how intelligent and whether you've learned the information or not is what is giving you adhikara. And are you using that knowledge with integrity? And so my lineage is the lineage of Mahapurusha Sri Achyutananda Das of the Odia Panchasakha. And that's a lot of words, right? So Sri Achyutananda Das was a particular saint in the 15th century who was a Renaissance. He was like a Michelangelo in India, master of multiple different subjects. And he was one of 5. So that's the Panchasakha. So he was one of 5 who did a major reformation of Vaishnavism in the 15th century in a particular area of India called Odisha, which is on the east coast. So very specific lineage. And when somebody is in the lineage, they can tell you that specifically where the lineage is coming from. All right. And so and just because I have adhikara doesn't mean I have adhikara in everything. I don't have adhikara to do a ritual to marry you in Hinduism. That's a different adhikara. I have adhikara in what's called daivagya, jyotish, meaning I can look at your astrological chart or look at omens and tell you what gods and goddesses you you could be working with to work with the issues at hand. That way you can alter your reality to be more in alignment with a beneficial creation. And that is what I have adhikara to do and to give. And when we have adhikara, we stay within the realm of what we have authority to do. And we refer out for the realm that we don't have adhikara to do. And we can switch to the next. These are nice, aren't they? All right, Hindu goddesses. So today my plan was just to focus on 3 goddesses. And I can focus on 33,000 gods and goddesses, but 3 that are really important for our time, our culture, ones that are being used, sometimes appropriately, sometimes inappropriately. And my goal is, if you're using them, how can we use them and in an appropriate way? Not, you're culturally appropriating, stop. That's not the goal. If we look at some of the Native American practices, they never chose to have European Americans coming over here and leading their ceremonies. They've had a lot of trauma from European Americans. And for a European American to all of a sudden step up and start doing their ceremonies, there's a lot of negotiation that has to happen. But when we look at yoga, Ayurveda, and Jyotish, the Indian teachers have been very intentionally promoting these sciences, coming to the US, coming to Europe, and teaching these traditions, and training individuals. and they've been very specific, and they've given specific people authorization to teach and to practice. So when somebody has gotten authorization from their teacher, we're nowhere near the realm of cultural appropriation. It doesn't fit any of the requirements and the discussions that we referenced earlier. So, all right. So now Hindu gods and goddesses. They're all over, and particularly in this kind of community that has a pagan, revivalist culture to it. The Hindu gods and goddesses. They're on candles. They're on bowls. They're on pictures. They're all over the place. In Hinduism, and there's so many. Do you just get the picture of the one you like and put it on the altar and do your yoga? Like, that's not how it's done traditionally. So how is it done traditionally? Traditionally, there's three main ways. One, you're born into a family that's the deity that's being worshipped, and so you do what mom and dad do, and they train you in it, and it goes along that way. Next, you come to a spiritual tradition, whether it's yoga or Ayurveda or chanting or devotional practices, and that tradition is worshiping a certain deity, and you start learning through that tradition, and you get accustomed and acculturated to that lineage and the deities that come with that lineage. Then there is what I am, and that's prescription based on astrological rules and omens, and that's called Jyotish in Sanskrit. And one more that we can add here would be the deity comes to you in a dream or comes to you in a vision. And even if that's how the deity first came, everything else still applies. But that's just what is making that be the particular deity that's on your altar. It's not just that we think it's cool. That's not the reasoning. Why does one work with one goddess over another? And I'm using goddess because I'm going to be talking about three. That by the time I'm done talking about them three, you'll all be like, that person needs that one, that person needs that one, I'm going to go buy a picture of that one for that friend, okay? Because I'm going to give you this deeper breakdown of how we use them as medicine. And but the first clarification, because I'm using these three goddesses, there's a Western, a New Age Western approach that says, oh, reconnecting with the divine feminine, Hindu goddesses. In India, whether we're using god or goddess, it's not about feminine or masculine. It has nothing to do. You want to empower your feminine. You want to, oh, that's the patriarchy. That's our Western storyline. That is not the Hindu storyline, and there isn't this differentiation into masculine and feminine in that way. A patriarchy and matriarchy. In Hinduism, they're always looking for a balance between male and female, masculine and feminine. And when they say that, they don't mean worship God and goddess. That's not what they mean. Because we approach either God or goddess not based on trying to empower divine femininity, the divine feminine, but we approach that in that how you talk to your mom is very different than how you talk to your dad. How you talk to your spouse is very different than how you talk to your friend. And whether the spouse is same sex or opposite sex, that friend just change that gender so that it fits. That you talk to, the tone of our voice changes when we talk to a man or a woman. It's healthy human relating. And when you talk to a little kid, you don't talk the same way that you talk at a party to some random guy. You talk to a little kid, your voice lightens up. You talk really soft. You get playful. Your attitude changes, right? In that same way, when we approach Divine Mother, we've just taken on the attitude of a child who's approaching its mother. we just changed ourselves by approaching the divine as goddess. Did the divine change? The divine never changes. The divine is beyond any limitation that we place upon it. But we changed by approaching the divine as a mother. If we approach the divine as a father, we're approaching it very differently. If we approach the divine as this old man who punishes you, there's this fear-based spirituality, that's fear-based religion that's present. If you approach the divine as this mother who loves you and who's going to care for you, you can kind of like soften up and, oh, she's there to care for me. You can invoke this feeling of nurturing in your body, in your whole emotional makeup, right? And if we approach the goddess as this plump, motherly, all-giving goddess, that's very different than approaching the goddess as a scrawny, ribs showing, breasts sagging, dark, covered with images of death type goddess. Very different frequency, not invoked in the divine, invoked in us. So the form of the divine that we use is for us. It's not for the divinity. Divinity doesn't need us. Everybody with me on that one? So it's not about them being cool. It's about, when we use these, it's called upaya. When we use these medicinally to heal, it's about what frequency are we missing, or what frequency is not working in us that we need to get into tune so that we can tune with that frequency and better work with the universe. If money's not working in your life, there's something out of tune. If relationship isn't working in your life, there's something not in tune. If every relationship a person is in, there's something in their consciousness that's not working right. It's not in alignment. There's some wrong thought or belief system happening there. And just by approaching what we need to shift how we hold ourselves, all that shifts as well. All right, so we get why we approach, why we're going to use a particular god or goddess in a certain way. So the first goddess we're going to talk about is Kālī. This is one of my favorite pictures of Kālī. When I look at this picture of Kālī, I can feel love inside my heart. And so when we have images of deities, we want to, when we see that image, we want to feel this connection awaken in us. If you're looking at an image of a deity and it's just like, there's no emotion being invoked, it's not the right image for you to be using. So I have my favorite image of Kālī here. Now, from the prescriptive understanding of Jyotish, and I preference with that, because there's other reasons to use Kālī, but from the prescriptive understanding of Jyotish, of when am I going to prescribe and say, you need Kālī in your life, like what's happening in your life, Kālī is going to be able to help you with. In the astrological tradition, we associate Kālī with Saturn and the moon. And the moon is our sense of nurturing, and Saturn is this sense of lack. So when a person is suffering from this sense of lack, this scarcity mentality, Saturn is a very heavy and depressed planet. When the person is suffering from depression and they just can't look up, everything seems negative. Often the mind is working like this because there's been neglect earlier in life. The person had needs, those needs didn't get met, and they had to just my needs aren't going to get met. And so, everything that they look at, it says good, and they find some way to make it not good. That way they don't have to believe in it, because they have this deeper core thing that says it's not going to work out for me. And so they drop. So everybody has somebody in their head that is just like that, right? And these people are often avoidant in relationships. And then we have people who they hide the other elements a little bit better with all their new age jargon, but they still in relationship when things aren't going well, they just disappear. They don't want to deal with it. And it's the same way. It's closing down. I can't make this work, so I'm just not going to deal. And they refuse to look at what's not working. Often, when all these issues are there, people use alcohol to numb and not have to deal with these things. And so alcoholism is directly connected to the same frequency or same disharmony, we should say. So people suffering from these things, we use Kālī. Somebody who's dealing with depression, we use Kālī to cut through that negativity. Somebody who doesn't want to show up, we use Kālī to cut through their denial. That way they're faced with reality. And she's surrounded by death because there's only one thing that you're guaranteed in this life, and that's dying. And so she says, look at what's real here. You're gonna die. And that's the first thing that we all have to face, is that this is temporary. And so many people they wait to their deathbed to say, oh, I should have, I shouldn't have. It doesn't work like that. Kālī gets rid of those I should have, I shouldn't have on the deathbed. The Kālī devotee does not have them. Because there's no denial of what needs to be done in your life. There's no numbing and hiding from. So Kālī. So now is everybody getting how like I'm using these as upaya, as remedial measures, as medicine for people? Now, so for those who think that they need it for their life, and this is being recorded, so I'm also talking for the 5,000 people that are going to watch this on YouTube. Those who think they need Kālī in their life, and or those who are working with Kālī already, how do we approach Kālī without being appropriative, without appropriating her? Do we just throw her image? Do we just go buy a statue and put her in our bathroom? And I say bathroom because it's the worst place to put a Hindu deity. It's the most disrespectful place to put a Hindu deity is in the bathroom. In the bathroom, have pictures of pretty women or sexy somethings, or and don't put Hindu deities in the bathroom. So if you're wanting to worship her or already worshiping her and wanting to worship her authentically, my first, and I'm talking in America, in California, to Americans. So I'm recommending, and I'm saying that because YouTube, but my recommendation is the primary temple of Kālī in America at this point in time is, for the West Coast, is Laguna Beach. And the Laguna Beach Kālī temple is connected to the Ramakrishna order, and it is an authentic Kālī temple. Now, if you say that Laguna Beach is too far away, then remember our goal was intimacy. If you want to say that somebody's your friend, but they're too far away to ever visit, then are they really your friend? They're not. If you can't take a visit to her temple, then there's not that intimacy. There's not that connection to her that gives you authority to even bring her into your home. We want to visit her. And that Laguna Beach temple is the best. And it's not the only one, but it's the primary one that I recommend because they're very open-minded and they will welcome you in and they will teach you about her. Kālī. One of the ways we make Kālī happy is donating to the poor, the hungry, and the homeless. So if you're wanting to bring Kālī into your life, make sure that you're somehow supporting one of these deprived groups. I recommend reading Ramakrishna Paramhamsa. There's multiple texts. There's the story of his life. There's multiple stories of his life. There's some of his students' teachings. But if you want to connect with Kālī, connect to somebody who was the most famous Kālī devotee of our present time. And by connecting to him, you're creating intimacy with Kālī herself, thereby not appropriating. And then, for any Hindu deity, we do a mantra. And Kālī's mantra is done in the evenings. Durga's mantra is done in the evenings. Lakṣmī mantra is best done in the morning. Where do you get the mantra from? If you Google the mantra, Google has no adhikara. It is not an authentic source. We don't get our mantras from the internet. Now, if you have a teacher, you're in a teacher's lineage. You've gone and done workshops with that teacher and studied with that teacher, and they have teachings that are online. That's different. That's not Google landing you on a random page where you just trusted Google to give you an initiation, okay? But if you have a teacher and they have a recording where they're talking about a mantra, that's okay, because that's your teacher that you have intimacy with. We all get how important this intimacy word is. I really, when I read that one approach to cultural appropriation, I said, this guy hit it on the head. The intimacy covers it. Do we have that connection? And so, mantra, where do we get the mantra from? You can go to, Kālī mantras are not easy to get. We, in general, either a teacher who has authority to give you one, or a Hindu priest who is willing to give you one. The easiest place to get one is the Laguna Beach Kālī temple. And they will invite you to the worship. You can see how she's worshipped. They will tell you where to start in some prayers or mantras to use for her. And at that point, nobody can tell you you are culturally appropriating. That little extra time creates the intimacy that allows you to learn about the culture, to have the proper respects in the culture, and to have the intimacy. It's very simple. And so for those who came a little bit late, one of my goals is, when we talk about cultural appropriation, there's a lot of gray lines. And people are doing practices, and how do I know, is it cultural appropriation, is it not? My goal is to get rid of the gray line. Are you connected to the source, or are you not connected to the source? And what are the indications of that connection or not? And so here I've made it pretty clear, yes? So we're going to cover 2 more goddesses, and then I'll open it up for questions. So our next goddess is Durgā. And so everybody see how important Kālī is for our time? So Durgā, and I'm giving from the prescriptive understanding of Jyotish. Durgā cures delusion and the disturbance of Rahu. Now Rahu is the distortion of the mind. Rahu brings confusion, it brings doubt into the mind. Rahu creates traumatic experience in our life. Trauma. When people are traumatized, they are disconnected from their body. They're disconnected from others. They have a hard time relating to other people. They have a hard time connecting in a healthy way. They develop addictions and don't know when to stop. They can't just do something a little bit. It's one thing to have a drink or smoke something or whatever, but it's another thing to just non-stop ruining your life with it. And so trauma creates a situation where people's ability to judge what's enough or not gets broken. These people will often have intense neediness, and they will often overreact. This is a standard symptom of trauma in a person's life, of dealing with trauma. And there'll be excessive use of drugs, overstimulations of the senses. In relationship, because there's different extremes to this. You know, there's the person who has little traumas, and then there's the person who's extremely traumatized, and whole spectrum here. In relationship, these are the type of people who they're really needy, they really want to be in a relationship, they over pursue somebody, they're in the relationship, and then they self-destruct the relationship and they're single again soon. And they're these serial monogamists, and it's just again and again and again, and they just can't stay in a relationship. This is generally understood to be caused by trauma in early childhood. And Durgā is this frequency. She's the protective mother. She's mother as protector. Where Kālī says, wake up and look. Wake up and deal with this. Show up. Durgā, she says, you're safe, my child. I'm going to give you safe space. You got these problems, I'll take care of those problems for you. Relax. Be centered. Be in your heart. Come down. Be present. So this is the energy of Durgā. And so she heals this disturbance. Because that trauma makes a person, there's no safety. They don't have this place to relax and be present in themselves. And Durgā gives them that safety, taps them back into this. They might have not had it from their mother or home situation, or they, maybe in a later situation, their trust was broken so bad that, you know, the trauma just broke certain features in them. Durgā helps restore that. Okay. And so Durgā helps bring them back into a place where they can find trust again, and they can find connection, because she's this mother who is always there for you. So everybody knows somebody in their life that could use Durgā, right? Now, as Kālī, she's a little more specific. I can't say just go visit any temple, but with Durgā, almost, I'd say 50% of the Hindu temples will have some image or representation of Durgā in them, because she's such a core figure in Hinduism. She's the divine protective mother. So most likely within an hour to 3 or 4 hours, you can find a Hindu temple that has some Durgā iconography in it. And if you have one nearby, Tuesdays and Saturdays are the days that we visit Durgā. If it's a 5-hour journey, find out, call the temple, say, when do you have Durgā celebrations? And when they tell you, you do the journey. And you don't, it's not about having to go and do X, Y, and Z. Taking 5-6 hours to journey to her, sit there, see her ritual, connect with that community, that's giving you the intimacy that is taking you out of culturally appropriating. And most temples, the Hindu priest will be open to teaching you about the mantras to Durgā. And many yoga teachers and bhakti traditions will give and have various mantras to Durgā. One of the important things with Durgā is with Kālī, we want to donate to the poor, the hungry, the homeless. With Durgā, community service and doing things that are benefiting the community as a whole become very important. And so we all have, and I can't say all, but there's the people that we know in our community or our lives who their life is just built around community service. These people, even if they don't go to a Durgā temple, they're worshiping her because they are caring for the community, that is her frequency, and that will bring the harmonizing that she empowers in us. Okay, one last goddess. Now, before I go into Lakṣmī and why we use Lakṣmī, if you have a Ganesh image, and I'm pointing at this brother over here, he has Ganesh in his home and he's interested in Ganesh, and now we're going to make a journey to a Ganesh temple at some point, and Ganesh's main day is somewhere in August, and it's lunar calendar, so it changes. But in August, I would recommend visiting, his celebration, and you can even bring the Ganesh from your home. That way, he's getting connected as well, and then you're good for the year. So in your home, for your personal, it doesn't take much. Now, if you're going to put a big Ganesh in a yoga studio or a Lakshmi in a yoga studio, you need to do the serious work first. We don't just put it in the studio because, oh, that's what people that do yoga in India, they have Lakshmi, so we're going to have Lakshmi in our studio. Doesn't work. In your home, you can have the image. It takes a little bit of connection, and then it's you're having that relationship. When we bring it into a yoga studio, there needs to be a deeper level of intimacy before you put it on the wall or bring the statue in. And I'm not saying take the statue out of your yoga studio. I'm not saying remove it from your wall. I'm not saying stop at all. What I'm saying is do now. If it's hanging on the wall, she wants you. If Ganesh is in the studio, he wants you. He wants you to come and have intimacy with him. Lakshmi wants you to have intimacy with her. Don't remove it. Don't take it out. Create that intimacy. And so with Lakshmi, she's connected to Venus. And Venus represents love and appreciation and prosperity. And love, appreciation, and prosperity are all tied together in the Hindu tradition. So when Venus is afflicted, a person is dealing with self-love, they're beating themselves up, they're the person who, like, they never feel beautiful enough, it doesn't matter how beautiful they are, they think that there's something wrong with them, and it'll show up as relationship disharmony, where on a certain level they're creating their relationship disharmony because they're like, yo, you never loved me. It's like, I told you I loved you 5 times yesterday and you're trying to tell me I don't love you. Like, what can I do? And you know, there's that, why is that disconnect happening? Because the frequency of Lakshmi is not in alignment in your life. So when we have this issue, and notice this issue is very different than the Durgā issue, where the person is literally just self-destructing the relationship, destroying it, just creating all kinds of issues, and you know, this lack of self-love. And my job as a Jyotisha is to find out which one of these is, to be really clear which one is causing the problem. I'm doing a very oversimplified introduction so that you can feel out. And in the meantime, you can be approaching what you need. And you know, you could have had Kālī on your altar all this time and been like, oh my gosh, I need Lakshmi. What do I got Kālī on there for? Okay? So, or vice versa. You know, the person who's over in love with themselves, but not willing to face things. They might need to move from Lakshmi into Kālī. So, this variation. Lakshmi, most Hindu temples have something for her. She's connected to the full moon. She has a holiday. Her holiday is the new moon, is the harvest new moon. And so in the fall time. And one important thing for Lakshmi is to be donating to women's charities. Things that help abused women, women empowerment, women education. You know, the suppression and oppression of women in our culture is the frequency of Lakshmi being taken down. In Hinduism, there's a saying: if the wife in the house is happy, the house is happy. And in the same way, if women are happy in the culture is going to be happy and prospering. All right, so that's my introduction to Kālī, Durgā, and Lakṣmī, and approaching them without appropriation. Let's see, what time is it? 3. I got a few minutes. Questions? Yes.
Is there any type of like flowers or direction that they need to be in on their altar or offerings?
All that I would recommend. Talk to a priest, talk to somebody who's practicing. We could talk after. And the question was, where do I put the altar? Which direction is the altar? What kind of flowers? All that is part of the process of growing intimacy. And And if a person has no connection with that, that's that much lack of intimacy. Your wife, you know what her favorite foods are, you know what she doesn't eat, you know what time she likes to go to bed. So these are things that we develop and cultivate through intimacy. And so we don't have to have it all right now, but it's a process of learning these gods and goddesses as we as we have them in our lives. Yes. I can't hear.
How do you deal with seeing examples of appropriation, like on the festival grounds, or if you're seeing it in front of you?
So I don't get angry about it, just because I think anger doesn't serve. Sometimes with certain companies, I've written them and said, I'm educated on this topic. This is the link. This I think is inappropriate. If you want to talk about it, I'm available here. That's one way. On the grounds here, this is right here, this lecture, how I'm addressing it. Yes. If I see something that offends me, so there's different levels of offense, and if the offense is disrespectful enough, I'll do something. If it's something not that bad, then that I put it on being trained in how to worship them. There's different levels. On the ground, if someone was stepping on something, in the bathroom, which those two things I mentioned, those I couldn't hold back from saying. You could reach out to the person and talk to them about getting a little education. And are you connected? Do you know about that? Do you have a connection to that, or are you appropriating? And to me, we actually get more by asking a question where a person has to reflect than by telling them. Yeah. One more question. So he's asking, when I do the prescription, am I doing it based on what a person says or on their charts? And for me, I would say 80% their charts, 20% what they say and how it's showing up for in their life. Yes. And then there's omens. And when you do this work, you'll get the omens where there'll be times where I say, I think you need to do this and this ritual, and I have a lawyer's office that's right next to mine. Somebody opened the door, walked out, said, you can't do that, the da-da-da-da-da-da. And I was like, okay, wrong ritual. Let me look again. And I recalculate and come up with what's there. And so when we work at this level, the gods and goddesses make clear. And often, like, for example, Lakṣmī, she's connected to shells, seashells, and we put shells on the altar with her. And, I'll mention, and I'll mention, when you make the altar, put shells on it. And they'll be like, I just got all these shells last weekend. And that's my confirmation that I've given the correct prescription. Because she already came. That person came to me and got the direction from me because it was all already being orchestrated at a higher level. Yes. All right. I'm going to be lecturing again, same lecture, in 15 minutes.